Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here as always with Simeon. We have another Q&A from this month from our mentorship group, and we're going to broach these questions single by single, one by one. The beginning of the conversation will be around the topic of arm wrestling. Someone was very interested in my current passion of arm wrestling and what we're doing in the sport, my diet, the training styles, so on and so forth, and how that affects my other training goals. And then we're going to move more towards the more standard mentorship questions as we move through the conversation. Without further ado, Simo, welcome back to the podcast, mate. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing, actually.
Great.
Yeah, fresh
Good.
off vacation, I'm all good.
Yes. Last time we spoke, you were about to go on vacation, but you're talking about all your aches and your pains, and now
All
you're
gone.
feeling good. I felt bad. I cut the podcast last time in a bit of an awkward way. It made Simeon seem like he was a frail old man. It's not the case. Simeon's a beast. But yes. So we'll dive straight into the first question. The first question today is, directed to me in the sense of it's framed around arm wrestling, but I would love to get your opinion, Simeon, on this as well. And the question is, have you adjusted your diet since starting arm wrestling? And the simple answer is no. My basic, let's call it principle with my diet is relationship. So I try to have as positive of a relationship as possible with my diet. I don't follow any ideology or strict framework, let's say. I have my own loose rules around what I do, and I can go through them now. But I don't tend to change my diet for different endeavors, different goals. There is a time that I might have to. If I choose to compete, there are weight categories like in most combat sports. And obviously it makes sense that if I'm just above a lower weight category, I could cut 3 or 4 kilos and get into a more competitive shape for a competition. I don't want to right now. I'm very happy and comfortable in my body, and I like to feel that way. So number one rule, relationship. I try and have a good relationship. I'm a sweet tooth. I love to eat cake and cookies, and so I try to limit my intake of these, but I definitely don't police it. I allow myself to have, cakes and cookies whenever I feel like I need a boost of calories. Some basic rules of thumb. I have a savory breakfast. I try to start the day with a solid meal to fuel myself. I think one of the key parts of nutrition for me is fueling my endeavors, fueling what I want to do. And I'm definitely not under eating. After a savory breakfast, I then tend to have a morning of work and have a decent sized lunch. I don't have a really carb heavy lunch. Usually what I'll do is I'll have more of a kind of protein, fats oriented lunch to sustain me and not have a kind of carb dip in the afternoon, just what works for me. And in the evening, I'm very liberal with my carbs. I allow myself to carb up and have a nice big meal of whatever I choose. I tend to stick away from kind of, I wouldn't say gluten in general because I love cake, but I would tend to stick towards wholemeal pastas, brown rice as opposed to white rice or white pastas type carbohydrates. But again, I'm not policing that too strongly because if a meal tastes good and it gets more or less the macronutrients that I need, I'm happy. Some other small additions to my diet that I think are valid to say is I use supplements. I use magnesium. So in the evening, I take magnesium before bed. I have a biglycinate right now just to support my recovery and my sleep. In the morning, I try to drink liquids before I have my first coffee, and then I have creatine. I take this in the morning in a kind of smoothie with some frozen berries and protein powder. For me, I like a vegan protein powder. I'm not vegan. I'm just less able to digest dairy products, or whey. So I prefer to have a kind of pea rice blend. And that's more or less how I see my diet. Again, good relationship, fueling what I'm doing, trying to use supplements that are really that really have stringent and strong research that makes sense to take, and I don't play around with too much outside of this. That's about it, I would say. How about you, Simo?
You mean in whether I would adjust my diet or just in general what I'm doing?
In general, let's hear about your diet because I feel like that's more interesting because the
It's
adjusting
actually,
is, yeah.
yeah, it's actually not too dissimilar from yours. So for me also, food is it's also like it also has a social component. I don't want
Yes.
to limit myself in social situations, and the most basic one would be, just in the evening eating with my girlfriend. I don't want to be like, yeah, we're cooking together, we're eating together. I don't want to do my separate stuff. So yeah, I think you put it perfectly. Having a healthy relationship with food
Mm.
is really important to me as well. And since I'm also not really competing, and even if I were competing, I don't think it makes a lot of sense in early stages, or on like an amateur level to, in most cases, go like all in and super super hard on that, like do massive weight cuts and stuff. It's just not worth it, in my opinion.
Mm.
But yeah, that's just for me. So yeah, um, that's that. And then in terms of what and when and how I'm eating, it's actually, this is maybe something where we differ a little bit. I don't tend to eat a lot in the morning, more around noon. So
Mm.
usually I have a bigger meal around, you know, 1 p.m. or something like that. And then until then, it's kind of, it depends a little bit. I'm not fasting, but I'm also enjoying kind of the, after night, the empty stomach and the like feeling a bit
Mm.
light, let's say.
Yeah,
And I
interesting.
also
Mm.
like to let some hunger build,
Mm.
because I'm somebody who can eat a lot. Like I can eat when I'm not hungry, and I'm trying to
Right.
practice being hungry in a way, so that I'm not always like so focused on food and always thinking about food. Um, but yeah, I kind of like just bigger-ish meal around noon, and then the main meal for me is also in the evening, um,
Mm.
as well. It will
Yeah.
shift a little bit depending on when I train, though. So um, right now, I have some sessions that are pretty late, and then I usually eat around noon, and then a bit later in the day, something like 3 or 4 p.m. again, and then a smaller meal after training, just
Yeah.
so I can sleep. Because if I'm home by like 10 p.m. and I've been training till 9:30 or something like that, and there's already like adrenaline and stuff going on, and
Mm.
then I'm also eating a big meal, then I'm not sleeping that night.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then that's also something to consider. And then, like you said, fueling for training is really it. So um, if I'm planning to do a bigger session in the AM as well, so on some days maybe I decide to do a strength session around 10 or 11, I'm not going into it on an empty stomach. I try to
Mhm.
have something. Also, just because I notice, especially for like bigger compound lifts, I do get a bit dizzy if I'm not fed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's something that's
that's.
interesting. Probably the reason as to why I used to do a kind of 2 meal day and have two big meals rather than three kind of normal ones.
Mhm.
One of the issues I found, well, there's two issues that I found. One was that I'm not the biggest eater in the moment, um, and I struggle to eat enough to actually fuel myself. And I found that I would sometimes lose weight quite quickly, especially through the
Mm.
warmer months because I was more active. and 2 meals wouldn't really sustain me. So having just a couple of eggs on toast in the morning, for example, something simple, and it's not so big, but it's enough to kind of get me going into the day, helps me fuel the kind of activities of the day, and then I can kind of have a smaller or like normal size lunch. And that also really helps depending on what time of day I'm training. If I've got an early afternoon session, it helps me to have a breakfast, because then I can have a smaller lunch and be fueled prior to the session, but not have a big heavy meal, that's like breaking a fast. So that's quite useful, I find. If I'm training in the evening, and especially like yesterday, for example, was arm wrestling, so it's in the evenings, because most people are working a kind of normal 9 to 5, 9 to 6. So of course, then my meals shift around a bit, and I'll have like a bigger dinner before the training, maybe an hour before, and a smaller meal after the training, just to fuel before bed. And again, the same reasoning as you, to aid recovery, but not to kind of destroy my sleep. And again, I kind of stick to the same rules. It's like more carb dominant prior to training and a bit less afterwards, especially before bed in that situation. But again, these are not hard, fast rules. They're just frameworks, let's say, or loose things that I try to stick to, and habits that I've had for years on years that just seem to work for my body. And that's probably the biggest difficulty people have, is creating good habits and sticking to them. It's far easier to create kind of bad habits and stick to fast food or the easy thing, or to not get any joy from cooking and lose the ability to form a good relationship and a good habit with the meal time and the social time and so on and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually what you said, enjoying cooking is such a big deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's also like that also helps sometimes with like choosing to wait, until later for when the good food is ready, and I'm not just trying to shove whatever I can find.
Yeah. I definitely went through a stage when I was younger of seeing food as fuel only. And then when I met my partner, she was very much like, "What on earth are you doing?" I lost the romantic relationship around food itself, and it became a means to an end of just fueling for the training, or fueling for the next thing. And actually now it's a lot more of a relationship with cooking and taking time and enjoying that process. And that's been a really nice addition to my adult life that I didn't have as a young man. Let's move forward into the next question, because it's relevant, but it's moving slightly away from nutrition. I think nutrition is a slightly volatile topic. Everyone has their own opinion. I'm sure, similar to me, you're of the opinion of we're all individuals. We all have slightly different needs, and it's important to kind of dial into what really suits you and your social setting, your kind of genetic predisposition, so on and so forth. The next question is as follows. When it comes to training volume, do you work both arms equally, or do you focus more on your dominant arm? If you do favor one side, do you notice any carryover fatigue in your dominant side during other activities? So again, this is relating to arm wrestling. So I'll kind of preface the question. I do try to work my arms evenly regarding the volume. The intensity is the relative intensity is the same, but the loadings I'm using are different, because I'm just stronger on my right arm in most lifts. Some lifts I'm not, but in some specific lifts I'm quite significantly stronger, like 10, 15% stronger on my right arm at this current stage. And because it is a competitive environment, there isn't much point in me holding the right arm back until the left arm catches up. The best thing to do right now is, because it's a unilateral kind of sport, is just to kind of push both as hard as they can be pushed and just see where they end up. And that's, completely fine. That's why they have right arm championships and left arm championships. Is we're all organic, we're all different. one of my training partners is the complete inverse to me. So I'm stronger right arm, he's stronger left arm. So we just make each other better session by session. It's a really good kind of training environment, kind of the perfect synergy. So there's definitely an equal focus in the training. I wouldn't say I focus on the dominant arm, but it is pushed to a higher level just because it can train at a higher level. There is a really famous example of a guy called Devon Larratt. He's a Canadian multiple world champion, probably the most famous and iconic arm wrestler of our time. And he did what he called the giant pumpkin method, where he just trained his right arm for, I think it was 5 or 6 years. So he's all in right arm, nothing else, just pure focus. And he got to the level where he reached number 2 in the world at 50 plus years old. So an incredible achievement. You've got young guys that are half his age, full of youth and testosterone, and he's competing with the very best. He's unstoppable almost. If it wasn't for this one Georgian behemoth called Levon, he would be the number 1 in the world. But sadly for him, Levon has beaten him twice, and so maybe the giant pumpkin method didn't quite work for him. He has since gone back to training both sides and competing on both arms. For a while, he was calling the left arm his party arm, which is a nice thought. I think for me, I'll probably never do that. I quite like the feeling of working both sides and the nuance of having differences. I don't see one side being weaker than the other as a negative. It just is. I think one takeaway for people listening, and I'm sure many people listening aren't into arm wrestling, but as a principle for training, and we'll talk a bit more about this later on in the conversation, imbalance is normal. Imbalance is a principle almost of being a human being, an organism, an organic-ism. We are, as trees are, growing in a certain way. Yes, we can try and be biomechanically as efficient as possible, but imbalances, they're there. The same as we are biased towards right or left hand. We have certain biases. So long as they don't cause severe issue and pain, for me, I think it's okay. Is there a carryover of fatigue during other activities? Oh yeah, huge. As with any specific high intensity discipline, you have to make adjustments to your training load, your training volume, and your training goals and balance these out. I made a separate video on that of my goals and how I'm balancing these throughout this year. It's really important to get clarity on your goals. I think it's really important to set forth a plan and set forth with a goal or multiple goals and ensure you have a hierarchy so that okay, if for me right now, arm wrestling is my number 1 goal, I understand that I'm allowing that to negatively affect other things that I might want to work on because that's my number 1 priority. And that opens up the mindset of letting things to the side, at least for a time, and then coming back when you want to change the priority list. And for me, this has been a huge learning through the last 5-10 years of organizing my training and organizing other people's training. You simply can't have all of your X goals as the number 1 priority. It just doesn't work, sadly. So yes, there's a huge carryover fatigue, but I'm allowing that and I'm okay with that. And I just simply allow things to drop to the side. I don't make a concerted effort to maintain. I know there's a really big, let's say, popular narrative in, especially in movement culture, of maintenance, of putting skills and goals on maintenance as you work on other things. And I'm a bit frustrated with this. Why are you treating things that you've achieved as products, as physical things that you're going to put in your bag and haul with you for the rest of your life? For me, the whole purpose of a goal is the subjective experience towards that and the learning process towards that. And the whole idea of the thing is bigger than the thing. And the end product is just the top of the mountain. I know it's a cliche, but it's the journey toward that top of the mountain that actually is the thing that makes you a better person, that changes you as a human, that gives you these great life experiences, so on and so forth. The end product of the handstand or the six pack or the back squat or whatever it may be is just simply that. And that's all going to fade away. So,
and also if you try to carry it with you, it does become a burden at some point.
Hugely.
Because how like if you've been practicing for years and years, like there's so much stuff you've done, and you try to maintain everything and try to keep everything as is. You've got such a long bucket list. You're busy maintaining, and you don't have any energy left for anything else, really.
Yeah, 100%. There is, of course, an argument and a voice for maintaining some things. If you're really passionate about a couple of things, amazing. Try to keep them alive. But the principle isn't you achieve something and you have to hold on to it forever. The principle is soak it up, dive in, focus in for a time. When you feel like it's served you and you've learned, you don't camp out at the top of the mountain until you try to jump to the next one. You come down again and you move on. And that's the journey. That's the process. And for me, the beauty of a physical practice is it offers so many variable life experiences that are really valuable. I wonder, obviously, similar topic, but different sport in the martial arts that you partake in. There's obviously a huge load on your nervous system when you're doing BJJ, for example, wrestling. How do you manage your training in comparison to what I do? I obviously put my sport right now as the pedestal, and everything else kind of forms around that. Do you have a similar structure, or do you have a different way?
So right now, martial arts is probably it's difficult to say, like, because I think with the other goals that I have, it works out the way that I can get away with training, doing strength training just twice a week and make good progress, and prioritizing the rest days in between and making sure that there's always, for example, I always have a full rest day before the strength training sessions, so that I'm as recovered as I can be and that I have high quality sessions. And then we also have all the other stuff kind of around that. So that works out for me right now. But yeah, definitely, like, especially also because right now I'm in a phase where I'm doing a lot of grappling specifically. There's just so much gripping and so much tension for it's similar to also if you're climbing, like you're climbing a lot, and then you also have all these upper body strength goals at the same time. It's similar with grappling. You have all that gripping, all that pulling, all that all that upper body dominance, really. And then it becomes too much if you try to also do strength training 3 times a week. Like, it's like you can try, but something has to give. Either you have, a one hard strength session, a medium and a light one, or something like that, or you have you somehow manage to make sure that the training load that you experience from the grappling sessions or the martial arts sessions in general is, lighter or harder or whatever. If you can do that, then that's great. You can train at a higher frequency, but right now for me, it's just easier to, just have a twice a week frequency for strength and also flexibility. We have 2 bigger sessions. Yes, they are long, but I've had a full rest day before and I'm feeling good and I'm putting in high quality work, and then we have the grappling kind of.
So you have grappling 3
around
times a
that.
week. If you have a 2 strength, 2 rest, that's 4 days, and then 3 days of grappling.
Yeah, exactly. So Wednesday and Saturday for me right now is off. And then there's also like other minor stuff. So, you know, an hour here and there that's sprinkled in of martial arts
Yeah.
practice, that's a bit lighter. But that's also accounting. Like you have to account for that as well, because
A
if
load,
you
for sure.
have everything is balanced, but you're right on the edge, and then there's, even if it's just a PT session and you have to do some light stuff, it could be
Yeah.
too much. Like,
Yeah. I want to
so I'm
ask,
leaving a bit more.
when you kind of zoom out and the meta kind of organization of your training, are you seeing your BJJ grappling as the priority, and then your 2 strength sessions are capacity and supportive of that? Or do you see it almost like you have your grappling and you also have your goal of a X handstand push-up and X,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
it's more congruent right now, as opposed to how would you say, synergistic maybe. My strength training doesn't really serve my grappling specifically right now.
Yeah.
It does help,
It,
but not.
yeah.
It's not optimized.
Yeah.
Hate the word, but it's not optimized for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is more of a general approach rather than it being a specific.
Exactly. And again, it comes down to the same thing like we talked about with the diet situation. It's like, for me, that's good enough, because it's a different story if I was competing. Then
Exactly.
yeah, sure, let's do a full cycle and put everything into that, and then that's good. But right now, I'm just kind of smooth sailing as good as I can,
Yeah.
and trying to
Which is a
balance
really
that.
good learning moment, I would say, because probably every person listening is a non-professional athlete, i.e. Gen Pop. So the ability to choose goals that aren't necessarily congruent and still push forward in different directions is possible if we have a hierarchy and acceptance of you're not going to progress like a professional athlete because all of your resources aren't channeling towards one specific end. You're trying to slowly tinker between different areas and slowly edge forward in different ways. And it's important to kind of have a zoom in and a zoom out, zoom out, zoom in for the practice in that way. Which kind of brings us on to the next question. The next question is the last one in and around arm wrestling, but I think it's actually really interesting to talk about this as a general principle. The question is, when you take up a new sport or practice, do you follow the structure provided by the club or group that you're joining, or do you bring your own training knowledge in from the start? For me, if I go quickly through the arm wrestling process, and it's been just over 6 months of me really diving in, I always try and do this where the initial period, I try to be a clean slate, like tabula rasa, like I'm not bringing loads of baggage. I try to see, first of all, the landscape of what's currently available, what's currently out there, because I think it would be really short-sighted and really egotistical for me to say, I know everything about training, I'm going to just do my thing. Of course, I have a perspective and I know how my body works. But if I'm diving into a new endeavor, a new discipline, there's an age of learning that other people have done for me that I can learn from before I then merge that with my perspective. And I would really encourage everyone to, enter an endeavor, enter a physical practice, and try to soak up ideas from other people for a time. Some may be bad. There's a lot of bad ideas in arm wrestling, I can tell you. But there are also some fantastically interesting people, and as the sport grows, there are some really useful ideas. And being open to them has really allowed me to take ideas from arm wrestling and actually then help students in completely other endeavors with similar ideas. And I think that's been really valuable for me, not only as someone who's practicing arm wrestling, but a coach who's trying to help people and gain knowledge and impart that knowledge in new and interesting ways. And a discipline that is so fringe, such as arm wrestling, offers the opportunity to learn fringe narratives or fringe ideas and fringe tactics to deal with the very strange forces put on, specifically the elbow joint, for example. So I have a lot more understanding of the elbow, the wrist, the forearm, the shoulder, the interplay between them, and how kind of I can support people through rehabilitation, for example, or just strengthening for certain goals they have. And I think this is a really valuable piece of the puzzle that I wouldn't have had if I went into it with the perspective of, I'm going to just do what I think's best. Of course, I think we need to individuate. We need to set at a certain point a process and choose to do something. And obviously, when you choose to do something, you choose not to do other things. But that's just training. It's just a case of planning, choosing something, sticking to it for a while, seeing what works, seeing what didn't, iterating, moving forward. It's, from the meta perspective, it's so good. It's so simple. Obviously, you then get into the nitty gritty, and there's a load of stuff we can discuss and evolve and try. But from the meta perspective, that's it. That's everything, right? What do you feel, mate?
Yeah, man. No, I don't have much to add here, really. So, yeah, I think first off, like if you know how to train and how to practice, that is knowledge that you can apply to any discipline, because it's based on principles. It's not context specific. It can be applied to different contexts, or at least it should be. But still, like you said, especially in the beginning, I would assume that the people who are running the program, or who are, who have spent time and who have experience in a given environment, that they know more than me in that specific context. So there are always nuances that are specific to that discipline, to that context, that can be hard to catch on your own. So that's why I'm totally with you. In the beginning, blank page, and just observe what is, and try to learn as much as you can. And then once you've spent some time in there and understand a bit better how the training works and why things are done the way they are, that's when you can start to filter and be like, okay, this is useful, this is good information, and this is outdated, not so good, and we can leave it at that. And
also maybe this is really new and we have no idea if this is going to work or not.
Yeah.
And something I think that's something that this makes me think of is the whole pushback against science-based, research-based training. And I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had around this of people love evidence-based. Okay, but the issue with gaining good evidence that's actually good evidence is that it takes a long time. And sometimes it takes so long that people, mavericks or leaders in the field, have been doing X drill for 20 years plus before it becomes evidence-based that people, the general population, can actually take on, as seen by a lot of things in movement culture. The issue is sifting or filtering, as you say, through what is a mental idea that just won't work, and what is a solid principle-based idea that probably would work. And that's a process.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. There's a nice segue here. So the next question is all about working with general population clients and trying to support them when a client comes to you with an issue and their doctor has given them the advice of resting. And this person asks, how do you approach this difficult situation, especially given that rest alone is rarely the right answer, especially for a tendon issue? So before we pressed record, we had this discussion about you having some kind of flare-ups in kind of joint inflammation maybe, or some pain, and your training load was maybe too much for your body to adapt in that given period, and your system was giving you some feedback. You then went away, had a lovely 2-week holiday, you rested relatively, and now you're feeling good. Do you want to explain the situation?
Yeah, so so I have been having some issues with my left wrist on and off for quite a while now. So it's kind of like it's a weak spot for me. So whenever training load just in general is getting high, then the left wrist is usually the area that flares up most likely. And I think everybody has something similar, or most people have something similar. For some people, it's always the back, or it's the SI joint that kind of gets a bit blocked or whatever. And for some, it's the knee. So I think most people can get where this is going and where I'm coming from with this. So I just had a longer training cycle, and in the end, I played around with some new stuff that I haven't done before in the program, that added load specifically to my wrists, to wrist extension. And then I also had just a high training load from a grappling session, which is something that's difficult to control. It just happened. Heavy opponent, strong guy, lots of gripping, and that's when it happened. The wrist just went up. Stop what you're doing. This hurts. And yeah, so what I've tried in the past in those situations often was, I'm a person who likes to do stuff to make sure that things get better. I like to get active and attack the problem. But in this specific context, that might not be the best approach, because what my body needed was just some time to rest and recover. But resting in this context doesn't mean that I was doing completely nothing. I was just avoiding the activities that were aggravating to the wrist specifically, and not avoid all movement. So I was still active. I was outdoors a lot. I was hiking a lot. Everything was pretty low intensity. Also, just the change of scenery was really, really helpful. It just happened to line up with my vacation, which was,
Useful.
luck. Yeah, in that moment, very useful. And yeah, that's really all that was needed. Just some time off, some time not aggravating it, staying active, staying moving, doing what you can, and also making sure that I was using movement and physical activity as a means to feel better, and not as a means to push myself and trying to get something out of my body and adapting. So much more about kind of pampering the body and just feeling good, and that was much more important.
I think if we distill this down, we have two maybe key factors. One is distraction, and the other is relative rest rather than absolute rest. And so, first of all, distraction, one of the key issues that I think we're both very aware of is if you have pain or you have a small injury, it is so hard to not obsess over it. The issue is when we're obsessing over it, we're reminding our system over and over and over again, we're ingraining neurologically that we have pain. And it's easier to sense something that we remind ourselves of over and over and over again. The same way as if you're in a bad mood, if someone keeps saying, "Why are you sad?" it further exacerbates the issue. I think in pain science, there's a relationship there or a parallel, you could say there. So one great thing that was in this situation lined up for you well is that you were able to go and do something completely out of context and change environment and allow your system to stop obsessing over or potentially obsessing over an issue. So number one, I think that's a great learning point for anyone that has a bit of pain and injury. Number two, or just to kind of drill that down, something that I've learned within the past is to never stop. One of my first major injuries in my life was a big knee injury, and I had a knee hyperextension, and I was on crutches, and I was all sad, and I couldn't move around, and I couldn't run or jump, and so I just focused on getting really good at pull-ups, and I'd never really dialed into pull-ups before, but it gave me a focus, it gave me a driving force, and it allowed my body to focus on a positive aspect rather than a negative aspect, and it allowed me to fully evolve as a young man in the gym, and that led me to learn to do a handstand walk and the handstand. And long story short, I'm here today. So there are injuries suck, but what I'm trying to say, long story short, is that with a valid and viable distraction, there are also great opportunities to learn and to move forward in some way.
Really quickly before you continue, just a small add-on. So last year I had a minor shoulder injury also from grappling, so just an acute injury, and at that time I was starting to work back to the one-arm chin-up, and I was just starting really. So, and I couldn't lift my arm over like at this range. It started hurting. So thinking about pulling in that range, no way. But what I did was, like you said, kept moving, and it could look like shifting the focus to something else, and you know, which is helpful also in the context of what you discussed before, not being overly focused on what you can't do right now. But then it's also a different approach, or not a different, but a complementary approach, without just letting go of the goal of the one-arm chin-up completely. What I did was I went like, okay, what do I need today that will put me on a path forward and still keeps me on track for that goal? You know what I mean? So I had that block in my session, in my practice, that was dedicated to the one-arm chin-up. And even though I injured my shoulder like 2 days ago, I still went in and used that 20-minute slot or whatever it was and worked on my shoulder to get it back to eventually do hanging at least, and then start pulling again. And so it's just that mindset of, okay, I want this, but I need something else right now. But it's still the right thing to do to stay on that path and to get towards that goal. You know what I mean? Just looking at what you need in that moment, and you're still working on it. You can still work on a handstand even without inverting, because you can't get into that position right now. Maybe there's other stuff that you can do, and that's not directly related, but it's getting you towards it.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's just...
And then just quickly, no, great, I agree. The segue then moving forward into relative rest rather than absolute rest. So the general kind of rule from most GPs, most doctors is rest, don't do anything. Give yourself cover yourself in cotton wool. And the issue is that nothing ever changes. Yes, for some issues, rest is obviously useful, but the key is to understand what rest is beneficial and what rest maybe isn't. And again, to not give a blanket statement, of course, there's nuance. Absolute rest, bed rest or sofa rest, Netflix and chill rest isn't tending to be a positive stimulus for adaptation or for the body to actually recover. Usually it does the opposite, and long-term rest or absolute rest is more akin to atrophy and weakening of areas and actually taking steps backwards. Yes, there is an acute stage of inflammation that rest is needed for, but that's usually a very short period of time. Relative rest, however, as you described, when you're on a holiday, but you're still hiking, walking, moving around, giving a low-level stimulus to your body, can be incredibly useful and incredibly beneficial for a recovery process, not only for the distraction, but also for the low-level stimulation. And that's, I think, a really key learning for anyone working with general population clients, because allowing yourself to change your environment and change the perspective and have relative rest rather than absolute rest is applicable to everyone. Anyone can do that. And if you're working with someone and they've been given, in your opinion, poor advice, this is something that you can implement without too much worry.
Yeah, and also without really going against what, like you're not dismissing the advice from the doctor, because that's not something you should do. Like
Yes.
if you're not allowed to legally diagnose, then don't do it.
Yes.
And don't just dismiss advice from a doctor. That's not a
Very
not a
good
good
point.
idea.
Very good point.
And also, that's something that's also shouldn't be underestimated, is like giving diagnoses, because that's something everybody does this, like, oh, this could be this, I had something similar, it could be that. But being careful with that, because some people, it can really mess with some people's mental state, some more than others, but just being a bit more mindful with how we communicate there
Definitely.
as coaches is really, really important.
Definitely.
And with that general approach of like avoiding things, or avoiding, even not just avoiding an activity, but avoiding a load or a volume that is aggravating, and then trying to work around it and just tinker. Training process, like you said, it's a tinkering process. We're seeing how the body reacts and make adjustments all the time, and we look to increase capacity over time. If that's all we're doing, then it doesn't even matter what the diagnosis really is, if it's really a tendinopathy or something else. If we are having that process dialed in and we're actually tinkering and learning as we go
Doesn't matter.
and making adjustments, then we're good usually.
That's key. The one thing I wanted to say is I really avoid ever giving an idea of what something might be. If someone comes to me and they've been told something or they have an idea of what something can be, I say, possibly. I don't want to diminish that idea or decline that idea. I want to say, yeah, maybe. But more importantly, as you've just explained, it doesn't really matter if it's this or that or the other. The importance is what we do from here. You're feeling something, you have a sensation of pain or discomfort, and then you move forward. And we try to have a tinkering process that actually helps you. And what we try to do over a period of time is, not that I work with a lot of rehab patients, but when I have students that have an injury through the process that we work with, we try to have a discussion around the sensation. And so rather than going into the physical diagnosis, we just go, okay, well, let's go to the subjective sensation of what are you feeling right now, and how does that change over time? Because we can have a granularity of pain. It doesn't need to be pain's pain. It can be, oh, it's a discomfort, it's a light pain, it's a dull ache, it's a sharp pain, it's a hot pain, it's complete excruciating pain. And allowing a spectrum through that can really help, because a lot of the time everyone has discomfort. Everyone has a weird sensation, a bad sensation. If you do something new, you're probably going to have something of a weird sensation because it's new on your body. Your nervous system's there to protect you. So anything that feels a bit weird or abnormal, loading in a new manner, is probably going to give you a feedback of, something akin to pain, discomfort. It doesn't mean injury. It just means let's observe and see. And having that ability to have a conversation through that spectrum is incredibly useful at allowing Gen Pop clients to engage in that type of self-reflection is incredibly useful and incredibly important. if you asked every professional athlete on the planet on any given day, how do you feel? Almost every single one will probably say, oh yeah, I'm carrying a niggle, or the framework for them is clear. It's not an injury, it's a niggle. It's reframed from negative to something as part of the process. And as evolving, adapting humans that are pushing our bodies to do more, to do better, it's just part of the process, and it's okay. Anyway, I'm aware of we've got not much time left, so we have to quickly get through. The next one is, what's your take on PRI? So postural, what's it called again? Postural Restoration
I think
Institute. Yeah,
something like
exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, we're not that well educated on the topic. From what I understand, have seen, I've been to a couple of workshops that people have suggested postural restoration type exercises. I love the framework from a macro perspective, and I dislike it from a micro perspective. So again, off air, me and Simeon were discussing this a bit. Very simply, my perspective is posture, as good of a posture as possible is great, because we don't want to fight physics. We don't want to be biomechanically inefficient. Whenever I'm coaching someone through complex movements, whether it's through parkour or acrobatics, of course, there's a big emphasis on posture, but it's not. It's a macro perspective rather than a micro perspective. So I'm looking at general rules of thumb and weight centers and weight shifting. I'm not looking at where's the third rib aligned compared to X, Y, and Z, or what. I'm not going nitty gritty into the exact corset-like structure that you should have, and missing the point of posture. Posture is there to make movement efficient and easier. It's not there to overload cognitively and ruin the fluidity and flow of any one movement or moment. Some people that I've seen using PRI and have had things explained to me, I think, miss this point. And it happens, I think, in any discipline. People take a great idea and take it too far. And it's just about bringing it back to where it's useful and disregarding the excess that's probably more useless. As we discussed earlier in the conversation, we are organic. We are going to have slight differences from left to right, from front to back, from side to side, whatever. It's completely normal. You just have to look at Usain Bolt, we were saying earlier, to have scoliosis, flat feet, etc. And he will be the fastest man to ever run the 100 meters in our lifetime. So go figure, What is your view?
Yeah. So I agree. I think because you can go into such great detail with this kind of thing, like even if you just look at, so like Will said, we're not experts. I mean, I have looked up PRI this morning, which kind of makes me an expert, and it justifies me to have a very strong opinion on this right now. But no, but as even there, like, so let's go a bit through it, because I think a lot of people also don't know like what the core tenets or the basic premise is. So as I understand, in PRI specifically, it's that the human body is inherently asymmetrical, due to, and that's their argument, that due to internal placement of organs. And this internal asymmetry leads to postural patterns that are predictable. So that's where they're coming from. And that's their entry point into a very biomechanical lens of, this leads your, pelvis to rotate in a certain way. You have an in flare on the right hip and an out flare on the left hip, and that raises your rib cage in a certain way. So this side is more exposed and your right shoulder drops, and blah, 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 blah. And that's just one pattern, so to speak. And you can look at all these different different patterns that you can come up with, that and have your reasoning for why that may happen, and then you address it. So that's also interesting. You go into it with the premise that the body is inherently asymmetrical, and then the goal is to kind of move back into a state of neutrality, which is, so we're flawed from the get-go, or what? So that's already a bit weird to me. But I guess where I do agree with is that it kind of, any posture, any pattern can become a problem if you're kind of locked into it and you don't have much optionality. If you only have this one way of moving, or you only have this one posture, and you just can't get out of it, like your pelvis doesn't move in any other way and it's always locked in that position, then yeah, that's probably not so good, because you're going to see that in the way that you move everywhere. But then it's also, is it necessary to, how far do you have to go with this? I have, like I said, I have not had any experience with PRI specifically, but I have encountered similar concepts that came more from the angle of, how do you say, like functional or sports specific asymmetries.
Don't say the F word.
yeah. But that are kind of coming from the demands of a sport, right? And it's a different entry point. Then it's not just being human and the placement of your organs or whatever. Then it's that you're a soccer player and you're always kicking with the right leg, and so the body undergoes very specific adaptations to manage those demands, and then that's going to lead to locked patterns or a specific posture or whatever. And again, you have that entry point into very minute and very detailed biomechanic view. And at the end of the day, it's good. It's one lens to look through, but it's not everything. It's part of a much bigger picture. And being overly obsessed with this and trying to explain everything from this one angle is just kind of missing the point, I feel. Yeah,
I agree. I think because we're not so expert on the topic, we should probably leave it there.
One more,
guys, feel free.
I'm sorry, I know I'm aware of your time, but one last thing where I think this really can become an issue is if you are leaning so much into that moving correctly that it can lead to fear of movement, and people being so overly concerned with doing things the right way or the wrong way. And that's just not helpful at all. So that's also something that's just, by taking this very detailed look at it and overly theorizing, and modeling, it can, again, some people are kind of predisposed to like really vibing with that in a bad way.
Yeah.
So again, being careful in how you at the end of the day, again, diagnose, because that's what you're doing. You're having pelvic shift or whatever. Just be careful. With that.
And moving away from movement disempowerment. You want to try and empower people to move and give them opportunities to move, rather than tell them why they shouldn't because they're in danger of X, Y, and Z injury. I think one thing I've learned through doing sports such as parkour and climbing, the worst thing you can do is put the worst case scenario in people's minds directly, because it inhibits like normal confident action. And usually normal confident action is sufficient to keep people relatively safe. And actually, if you tell someone, oh, definitely don't do that because you might break your face. Definitely don't do that because you might fall to your death. Definitely don't do that because you'll break your arm. And putting all these scared narratives in someone's mind, it's just completely inhibitory. And exactly the same as overusing something like PRI. If you say to someone, oh, you shouldn't run today because your left foot's flat and it's shifting your pelvis, and there's a knock-on effect and you might long-term have a back injury. It's like, no one's going to do anything if that's the narrative. Yes, it's important to use frameworks and ideas, and I think PRI isn't a wholly bad one, but use it in a way that's empowering as opposed to disempowering.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the final question, which is a question around soft acrobatics and introducing new people to soft acrobatics. Where would you start and why? And I think in the name of movement empowerment, it's really important to allow people to enter at a level that is applicable and approachable. In my perspective, how I work with soft acrobatics is I see it in two categories to begin with. We have more open form and more preparation form, let's say. And one of the main forms to prepare is the arching and the bridge, conditioning the anterior side of the body in extension, making sure the spine can articulate and extend, making sure the hips can extend, making sure the knees can take load through a deep kind of knee flexion as you extend the body. And of course, then the shoulders, elbows, and wrists. So one aspect of soft acrobatics is the softer nature of mobility through extension. And that's really setting a base for later skills. And then in synergy with this, we can call this the preparation work. We then have what I would call planes work. And so you can see it very simply in 3 planes. Anyone doing soft acrobatics, they're either standing on 2 feet, they've got all 4 limbs on the floor, or they're inverted on 2 arms. So it's a kind of 2-4-2 kind of idea. And you can then start to explore different ways of moving from the feet to all floors, to maybe an inversion, and starting to use more open form tasks to allow people to start to explore transitions through standing, all fours, and of course, some types of inversions. I like to keep this a bit more open to begin with. It's nice to give people a chance to explore and be a bit freer, and then slowly iterate more and more skills into this explorative task. I actually have a video on YouTube that literally goes through this process. So if you look at crawling on my YouTube, you'll probably find it. There's 1,000,001 tasks you could do with this type of framework. For me, it works really nicely to then give people a springboard to actually dive into cartwheel variations, arching variations, kind of standing pivots and moving through jumping variations, so on and so forth. Crawling is also just a great thing to do in general for health and longevity. So I love it. Face down, face up. It's all good stuff. I'm not sure how much soft acrobatics you've taught. I know you've been to some of my workshops and we've taught together in the mentorship workshops. Do you have a different approach?
Yeah, no, I don't teach it much really. Like definitely we use this like crawling patterns, basic stuff, but nothing I would call soft acrobatics really.
Yeah.
Just much more general. Quadruped motion, rolling around, squatting. Yes.
Yeah.
A bit of. I mean, yeah, I guess it's kind of where do you draw the line and how do you define the stuff? But yeah, I think in general, I like to work from the ground up with this. So starting with even just lying on the floor and finding different ways to maneuver and this is also kind of coming from the martial arts background again. Like if you look at how BJJ practitioners, for example, move on the floor, just being able to move around on your back, roll and invert, even just on the floor level, and then building height and going into quadruped and blah blah blah. But that's kind of where, for me, it's kind of stops that crawling. I'm not so much into soft acting.
The lovely thing, it reminds me of the last workshop we co-taught in Germany. And so I shared some kind of soft acrobatics work and you shared the more martial arts perspective. But there was a huge carryover with the floor work. How we were moving on the floor in certain ways in soft acrobatics was then completely applicable to the martial arts context of using it to escape or using it to shift weight or using it to kind of attack a different angle of your partner. I think it's really nice to see the parallels of just what makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that reminds me of a nice memory there. I think I was able to learn quite readily some of the skills you were sharing just because they made sense in the context of, well, yeah, if I'm moving there, then obviously I'd pivot through here, so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's your timer?
It's a phone call, sadly. I have to go.
Okay.
Sorry to everyone for that. It's my grandpa. Guys, thank you for listening today. If you would like more information on the mentorship, please feel free to get in contact with Simeon or myself. There will be a link in the description, and we will be announcing a workshop later this year very soon. Simo, thanks so much for a great conversation today. Guys, thanks for the questions today. Keep them coming and have a great week.